Welcome to True Crime Insights, where we explore the most shocking and gripping true crime stories. Today, we're delving into a case that will leave you questioning everything you know about innocence and evil, a story of control, manipulation, and a crime that stunned the world. What happens when the person you trust the most is the one holding the knife, both metaphorically and literally? This is the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was known to everyone as the sweet, frail girl bound to a wheelchair. Her life a series of endless medical diagnoses, surgeries, and hospital visits. Her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, was her constant companion, a beacon of strength in the face of her daughter's devastating illnesses. But this image of love and sacrifice was a lie. Beneath the surface, something far more sinister was festering. What started as a heartwarming tale of a mother's devotion to her sick child would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing cases of abuse and manipulation in recent history. On June 14, 2015, the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard took a dark turn. Dee Dee Blanchard was found dead in her home, lying in a pool of blood, stabbed several times. The community was shocked. How could someone murder such a devoted mother? But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of deceit, manipulation, and psychological abuse that had been hidden for years. This was not a simple case of murder. It was the explosion of a life built on lies. The image of Gypsy, the fragile, innocent daughter, was shattered as investigators pieced together the timeline. This was not the work of an outsider. The gruesome truth was that Gypsy herself had played a role in her mother's death. But why? What could drive a girl who had been so helpless to commit such an act of violence? To understand the answers, we need to go back to the beginning of a life shrouded in lies and manipulation. We start this journey in 1991 when Gypsy was born. From the beginning, Dee Dee was determined to keep her daughter under her control. It began with small lies, saying Gypsy was born prematurely, claiming she had a wide array of illnesses, each one more devastating than the last. But as Gypsy grew older, Dee Dee's grip on her tightened. Gypsy was made to believe she was sicker than she really was, confined to a wheelchair, subjected to surgeries, and constantly fed medications she didn't need. And the world believed it. They saw Dee Dee as a hero, a mother sacrificing everything for her sick child. But the truth was she was creating a prison for Gypsy, a prison from which there seemed to be no escape. But as Gypsy grew older, she began to see through the lies. She realized that the illnesses weren't real, that she wasn't as helpless as she had been led to believe. The desire for freedom began to grow inside her, a burning need to escape from her mother's control. And as that desire grew, so too did the darkness within her. The situation became more desperate, the tension between mother and daughter unbearable. And it was that desperation that eventually led to the unthinkable, a plan to end the nightmare, no matter what it took. To understand the gravity of this case, we need to delve deeper into the lives of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. Their relationship was far from ordinary. It was a bond forged not by love and care, but by fear, manipulation, and a deep psychological dependence. Let's begin with Dee Dee. Dee Dee Blanchard, born Claudine Pierre, was a woman with a complex and troubled past. From an early age, she displayed signs of manipulative behavior. Some say she was born with a need to control, a trait that would later define her life. As a mother, Dee Dee was seen as devoted, almost too devoted. She did everything for her daughter, Gypsy. But beneath the surface, Dee Dee's actions were driven by something much darker. Dee Dee was convinced, or perhaps wanted everyone else to be convinced, that Gypsy was extremely ill. From leukemia to muscular dystrophy, Dee Dee claimed her daughter suffered from a litany of ailments. She shaved Gypsy's head to make her look like a cancer patient, confined her to a wheelchair, and even forced her to undergo unnecessary surgeries. This was a classic case of Munchausen by proxy, a rare psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy, and Dee Dee played the role perfectly. Gypsy Rose Blanchard, born on July 27, 1991, was the victim in this twisted scenario. From a young age, she was led to believe she was sick. Dee Dee's control over Gypsy was total. She dictated what Gypsy ate, when she slept, and even what she thought. For years, Gypsy accepted her reality, trusting her mother's every word. But as she grew older, the cracks in Dee Dee's carefully constructed facade began to show. The outside world saw Gypsy as a tragic figure, a sweet, innocent girl battling insurmountable odds. She was often the recipient of charity from those moved by her story. Organizations like Habitat for Humanity even built the Blanchards a house, complete with a wheelchair ramp and a jacuzzi. But all of this was built on lies. As Gypsy grew older, she began to realize that the life her mother had created for her was a prison, one that she desperately needed to escape. But how do you escape from the one person who controls every aspect of your life? Gypsy was trapped, but she was also resourceful. She found ways to connect with the outside world, using the internet as her lifeline. It was through online forums and chat rooms that Gypsy began to form relationships beyond her mother's reach. And it was here, in the shadows of the internet, that she found an unlikely ally. Gypsy's first taste of freedom came in the form of a secret online relationship. She met Nicholas Godejohn, a man with his own troubled past, in a Christian dating forum. What started as an innocent connection soon spiraled into something much darker. Godejohn became Gypsy's confidant, her escape from the horrors of her daily life. But as their relationship grew, so too did their desperation. It wasn't long before they began to talk about a plan to rid themselves of the one person standing in their way, Dee Dee. Gypsy had found someone who understood her pain, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to set her free. But this plan was no mere fantasy. It was a deadly serious plot, one that would soon be put into action. Gypsy's need for freedom had grown into a dangerous obsession, and with Nicholas by her side, she felt unstoppable. What followed next was a series of chilling events that would culminate in one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory. June 14, 2015, a day that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The scene was the Blanchard home in Springfield, Missouri, a modest house that, from the outside, looked like any other. But inside, something terrifying had occurred. Dee Dee Blanchard, the woman everyone knew as a devoted mother, was found dead. The discovery was like something out of a nightmare. The first person to raise the alarm was concerned neighbor Kim Blanchard, no relation to Dee Dee and Gypsy. Kim had noticed unsettling posts on Gypsy's Facebook page. The posts were cryptic and disturbing, hinting that something was terribly wrong. Concerned, she called the police, and together they performed a welfare check at the Blanchard home. What they found inside was beyond anyone's worst fears. As the officers entered the home, they were immediately struck by the silence. The air was heavy with the smell of decay. Moving through the house, they made their way to Dee Dee's bedroom. There, lying in bed, was Dee Dee Blanchard. She had been dead for several days, her body already beginning to decompose. The cause of death was evident: multiple stab wounds to her back. The scene was brutal, but what was even more shocking was what was missing. Gypsy. Gypsy, the frail girl who relied on her mother for everything, was nowhere to be found. Panic spread through the community as they feared the worst. Had Gypsy been kidnapped? Was she hurt or worse? The idea that she might have been involved in her mother's death seemed unthinkable, but the police knew they needed to find her, and fast. The investigation into Dee Dee's murder moved quickly. The police knew time was of the essence. They traced the posts on Gypsy's Facebook account and followed the digital trail. It wasn't long before they tracked Gypsy and Nicholas Godejohn to a small town in Wisconsin. They were found in a hotel, hiding out, seemingly unconcerned about the murder they had just committed. As the police arrested the pair, the truth began to come out, piece by piece. Gypsy, the girl everyone thought was helpless, had been the mastermind behind her mother's death. The crime had been meticulously planned over weeks, if not months. Gypsy and Nicholas had discussed every detail, the weapon, the timing, how they would escape. It was clear that this was no crime of passion. It was a premeditated murder, born out of desperation and a twisted need for freedom. The discovery of Gypsy safe and sound, though now a suspect, sent shockwaves through the community. The frail, sick girl they had all pitied was not who they thought she was. But as the details of the case unfolded, it became clear that Gypsy wasn't just a cold-blooded killer. She was a victim herself, of years of psychological abuse and manipulation by her own mother. This revelation would turn the investigation on its head, raising difficult questions about guilt, innocence, and the extent one might go to escape a living hell. But the investigation was far from over. As the police delved deeper into the Blanchards' lives, they uncovered a story so twisted, so disturbing, that it would leave even the most hardened investigators questioning everything they knew. How could a mother do this to her child? And how could that child, in turn, plan her mother's brutal murder? The answers lay buried in years of deceit, control, and a desperation that could only end in tragedy. With Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nicholas Godejohn in custody, the police began to unravel the complex web of lies, abuse, and manipulation that had led to Dee Dee Blanchard's murder. What they discovered was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. A story of psychological torture, a desperate bid for freedom, and a crime meticulously planned by a young woman who had been pushed to the brink. The first breakthrough in the investigation came with Gypsy's confession. Sitting in a small interrogation room, her frail figure and childlike demeanor belied the cold, calculated words that came out of her mouth. She confessed to everything, planning the murder, convincing Nicholas to carry it out, and even the details of how she had cleaned up afterward. But as she spoke, it became clear that this was not just the story of a murderer, but of a victim, of years of abuse that had driven her to an unimaginable act. Gypsy described a life of control, where her mother dictated every aspect of her existence. From the food she ate to the clothes she wore, even her thoughts were shaped by Dee Dee's manipulation. She was kept in a wheelchair, made to believe she couldn't walk, subjected to unnecessary medical procedures, and constantly medicated. Dee Dee told the world that Gypsy had the mind of a 7-year-old, incapable of making her own decisions. But the truth was, Gypsy was fully aware of the lies, and as she grew older, her resentment toward her mother deepened. As the investigation continued, the police uncovered a trove of online evidence. Gypsy and Nicholas had meticulously planned the murder through Facebook messages, texts, and online chats. The digital trail was damning. They discussed everything: how Nicholas would travel to Springfield, how he would kill Dee Dee while Gypsy hid in the bathroom, and how they would flee together afterward. It was clear that this was no spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a calculated and deliberate act. But the most shocking revelation came when the police discovered the extent of Dee Dee's deception. She had been lying not just to her daughter, but to everyone around her. Doctors, friends, even charities had all been manipulated into believing Gypsy was gravely ill. Dee Dee had concocted a life of lies to gain sympathy, attention, and financial support. She had convinced doctors to perform unnecessary surgeries, subjected Gypsy to endless tests, and even lied about her age to keep her under control. The more the police uncovered, the more they realized just how deep Dee Dee's manipulation ran. The diagnosis that explained everything was Munchausen by proxy. Dee Dee had deliberately made her daughter sick to gain attention and sympathy for herself. This rare and disturbing condition had turned Dee Dee into a master manipulator, capable of deceiving not only her daughter, but entire communities. For Gypsy, this realization was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it explained the years of torment she had endured, but on the other, it meant she had been living a lie her entire life. As the truth came to light, public opinion began to shift. Gypsy, once seen as a cold-blooded killer, was now viewed by many as a victim herself. People began to question who the real villain was: Dee Dee, the woman who had manipulated everyone around her, or Gypsy, the girl who had lived under her thumb for so long that she saw no other way out. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the tragedy: a young woman driven to murder by years of abuse, trapped in a life she never chose. But the case wasn't just about murder. It was about control, manipulation, and the devastating impact of psychological abuse. The police had pieced together the events that led to Dee Dee's death. But what remained were the deep psychological scars left on Gypsy. The question now was, how would the justice system respond to such a complex and tragic case? Was Gypsy a cold-blooded killer, or was she simply a young woman driven to desperation by years of abuse? The investigation had uncovered the truth, but the journey for Gypsy was far from over. The trial would be her chance to tell her story to the world, to explain the years of torment she had endured, and to seek some form of justice for the life she had lost. But would the court see her as a victim or as a criminal? The answer would come in the courtroom, where the final chapter of this tragic story would be written. The trial of Gypsy Rose Blanchard was one of the most anticipated legal battles in recent memory. It wasn't just about murder, it was about why she did it. As the world watched, the court would have to decide: was Gypsy a cold-blooded killer, or was she a victim who had been pushed beyond her limits? The answers would reveal hidden truths that shocked even the most seasoned observers. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. They argued that Gypsy had meticulously planned her mother's murder, manipulating Nicholas Godejohn into committing the act. They presented the online chats, the texts, and the details of the murder as evidence of Gypsy's guilt. To them, this was a clear case of premeditated murder, and Gypsy should be held fully accountable. But the defense told a different story. They argued that Gypsy had been a prisoner her entire life, subjected to unimaginable abuse at the hands of her mother. She had been brainwashed, her mind twisted by years of manipulation and fear. To the defense, Gypsy wasn't a criminal. She was a survivor who had been driven to commit an act of desperation. They brought in experts to testify about Munchausen by proxy, detailing how Dee Dee's actions had left Gypsy with no choice but to fight for her survival in the only way she knew how. The trial was more than just a legal battle. It was a public spectacle. Every day, the courtroom was filled with spectators, media, and those who had followed the case from the beginning. Opinions were divided. Some saw Gypsy as a victim who had been driven to the brink, while others believed she was fully responsible for her actions. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and every revelation brought with it a new wave of shock and disbelief. As the trial progressed, Gypsy took the stand in her own defense. She told the court about the years of abuse, the isolation, and the fear that had driven her to such a desperate act. Her testimony was raw and emotional, painting a picture of a life that had been dominated by her mother's lies and control. But it was also clear that Gypsy was no longer the helpless child she had once been. She spoke with a strength that came from years of survival, and her words resonated with many who heard them. The prosecution, however, was relentless. They cross-examined Gypsy, challenging her every word. They pointed out the inconsistencies in her story, the fact that she had been able to walk all along, and the way she had manipulated Nicholas into doing her bidding. To them, Gypsy was not just a victim. She was also a perpetrator, and she should be punished for her role in her mother's death. As the trial drew to a close, both sides presented their final arguments. The defense asked the jury to see Gypsy as a victim of years of psychological abuse, someone who had been pushed to the edge by a life of torture and control. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued that no matter what had happened in her past, Gypsy had made a choice to end her mother's life, and for that, she must be held accountable. The jury was left with a difficult decision. Should Gypsy be punished for a crime she committed out of desperation, or should she be shown mercy for the life she had endured? After hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was found guilty of second-degree murder, a charge that acknowledged her role in the crime, but also took into account the years of abuse she had suffered. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison, a sentence that many saw as a compromise, balancing punishment with understanding. For Gypsy, it was a bittersweet moment. She had finally escaped her mother's control, but at the cost of her freedom. Nicholas John, on the other hand, faced a much harsher sentence. Found guilty of first-degree murder, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court saw him as the primary perpetrator of the crime, manipulated by Gypsy, but ultimately responsible for carrying out the brutal act. His fate was sealed, a stark contrast to the more lenient sentence given to Gypsy. The trial may have ended, but the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard continues to captivate the public. Her case raised profound questions about the nature of abuse, control, and the lengths to which someone might go to escape a life of torment. Was Gypsy a victim or a villain? Or was she something in between, a tragic figure caught in a nightmare from which there was no escape? In the end, Gypsy's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of control and the human need for freedom. It's a story that will continue to be told and retold, a haunting reminder of what can happen when someone is pushed too far. For Gypsy, the years of imprisonment that lie ahead may be difficult, but they are nothing compared to the prison she lived in for the first 23 years of her life. A prison built not of bars and chains, but of lies, manipulation, and fear. The case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a haunting reminder of the dark side of human nature, a story of control, manipulation, and the desperate lengths to which someone might go to reclaim their freedom. As Gypsy serves her sentence, the world continues to grapple with the complexities of her story. Was she a cold-blooded killer, or was she a victim who had no other way out? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. For many, Gypsy's story is a symbol of survival, of a young woman who endured years of unimaginable abuse and found a way to break free, even if it meant committing an unthinkable act. But it's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked control and the psychological scars that such control can leave behind. Dee Dee Blanchard's legacy is one of deception and manipulation, a life built on lies that ultimately led to her death. But Gypsy's story doesn't end with her imprisonment. She's become a symbol of resilience, a woman who, despite everything, has managed to find some semblance of peace and stability behind bars. She's learned to walk again, both literally and figuratively, and is slowly reclaiming the life that was stolen from her. In prison, she's found a kind of freedom that she never knew under her mother's control. As Gypsy looks toward the future, the world continues to watch and wonder. What will become of her once she's released? Can she truly escape the shadow of her past? Or will it follow her for the rest of her life? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: Gypsy Rose Blanchard will never be forgotten. Her story is etched into the annals of true crime history, a complex, tragic tale that forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature. In the end, Gypsy's case raises more questions than answers. How much of what she did can be blamed on her mother's abuse? Could there have been another way out? And what does her story tell us about the power dynamics between parents and children, about the human capacity for both cruelty and resilience? These are questions that may never be fully answered, but they are worth asking as we continue to explore the boundaries of justice, mercy, and the human spirit. As we conclude this journey into the life and crimes of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, we leave you with this thought. Sometimes, the lines between victim and perpetrator are not as clear as they seem. In a world where control can be as deadly as any weapon, and where desperation can drive even the most innocent to do the unthinkable, we must look deeper to find the truth. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of one of the most disturbing and complex cases in recent memory. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, things are not always as they seem. If you found this story as compelling as we did, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the most gripping true crime cases. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth behind the headlines. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.